This video is intended to debunk talking points being made by a group advocating eastern routes for the Bonneville Power Administration's proposed Interstate 5 corridor reinforcement project. In a recent email, an opposition group sent out the following information, urging its members to spread misinformation. We'll go through them point by point, showing how they are not being honest. It was entitled Talking Points You May Want to Include when writing the editor.
If BPA puts up the towers and high voltage lines on the existing right-of-way, the impact will be far more reaching than just to the homeowners living on the right-of-way. It will impact all of the homeowners in Southwest Washington.
Now, this simply isn't true. It will actually have an absolute minimal impact on homeowners in Southwest Washington. Why? Well, the Ross-Lexington line, or lines 9 and 25 as they're known in this project, have been around for over 70 years. That's when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. And that's before the United States entered World War II. It will not impact all of Southwest Washington's homeowners, nor will it impact all of the homeowners who find themselves living along the right-of-way. People purchased their homes along the existing right-of-way with the full knowledge that new lines were always a possibility. Now they want to change those terms, and they are the ones who are truly playing the not in my backyard or NIMBY game.
Property values have already decreased more than 23%. The additional negative impact on property values for all of Southwest Washington will be huge if the eastern route is not selected.
The existing right-of-way is called that because it's a place where power lines and towers already exist. The BPA was far-sighted in its planning over 70 years ago and secured the right to build on what was mostly then agricultural land. Later, the real estate boom in Clark County saw developers building homes practically anywhere they could. All of the wonderful new homes you see that abut the lines were gobbled up by home buyers. Some even got into bidding wars with one another. Understand that the homes were built near a 70-year-old lines and tower system that was there long before their property became reality. If we ask for specifics in terms of how exactly all property values in Southwest Washington will be negatively impacted in a huge way, the people making this assertion have no answer. That's because there is no negative impact. If there's any impact at all, it's minimal, because the lines being proposed will be built right alongside lines that have existed since the 1940s. This is an issue of taking personal responsibility. First, you buy a nice home adjacent to a long-time existing high-tension power line and tower system. Then you complain about the very idea of a new line being put on in that very same right-of-way that's existed long before your house was ever built. Complainers want it both ways. They want to live near existing power lines, and they want to prevent BPA from using its land to build new infrastructure.
14,000 children will attend schools near the power lines receiving exposure to high levels of EMF. Many states have laws that prevent power lines from going up near schools due to concerns that long-term exposure to high levels of EMF may contribute to childhood leukemia. Sadly, Washington is not one of those states.
EMF is an emotional subject, and bringing children's health into the equation certainly gets people's attention. We want to be fact-based, not fear-based. The American Cancer Society says there's no correlation between cancer and electromagnetic field. The National Cancer Institute says the same thing. The Clark County Health Department says there have been no incidents of cancer clusters along the existing right-of-way. And to that end, when it came time to replace Orchards Elementary and Covington Middle Schools, the Evergreen School District built brand new facilities on the same properties, building them even closer to the lines along the existing right-of-way than the buildings they replaced.
How can BPA even consider putting up the towers and lines in the most populated area of Southwest Washington when there is a clear alternative through forested areas? Are people less valuable than trees?
The reason BPA can consider this is because BPA planners 70 years ago had the foresight to design a right-of-way that can accommodate this project. Like many agencies, BPA planned ahead to accommodate growth and power use. This point completely ignores the business of agriculture, which does indeed take place beneath the existing right-of-way. Here you see pasture land being used by its owner. And we also have a thriving winery that's placed a vineyard beneath the towers. On private and state-owned forest land, there will be no such activity. The environment will be destroyed, plain and simple. BPA is not bound by the environmental laws that we are. What's at risk specifically? Bald eagles. A rare species of salamander, in fact 2 or 3 of them. Endangered fish. And streams that can never ever be restored. The list goes on and on. Construction could also threaten Clark County's efforts to clean up and reclaim Camp Bonneville.
Putting up 15-story towers and high-voltage lines in populated areas will have a negative impact on small business and significantly slow the economic recovery in Southwest Washington. Homeowners will not have remodels done on their homes, their gardens refreshed, homes painted, appliances updated, etc., because of the uncertainty of the location of the 15-story towers and 500 kilovolt high-voltage lines and the threat of further decreasing property values.
The funny thing about this argument is that these businesses that exist beneath the existing right-of-way chose to set up shop after the lines were already there. One group advocating the eastern routes points to a letter from a real estate appraiser. He states the obvious: property values do indeed go down when power lines and towers are put in. The dirty little secret that this group is not telling you is the fact that the lines already exist near their property and that neighbors made a choice to live there. They are trying to run away from their personal responsibility for choosing to live near an existing right-of-way and existing power lines.
Security is a big issue, and just because a terrorist attack has not occurred does not mean everything is secure. The Twin Towers had never come down prior to 9/11. We are living in different times than we were 40 years ago.
First, they should be ashamed for invoking 9/11, but it illustrates our point that they use fear. On this point, we certainly agree. In over 70 years, there have been no major incidents that have occurred along lines 9 and 25. Over time, as people have chosen to live near these existing lines, neighbors have been the eyes and ears, watching out for any problems. By building in isolated areas, BPA is asking for trouble, and there's a record on this. On December 31st, 1999, eco-terrorists actually took down a BPA tower in an isolated area near Bend, Oregon. We are no strangers to eco-terrorism in the Cascade foothills. We all remember the dangers of tree spiking, and many of us have had our equipment damaged.
The existing right-of-way is not wide enough in specific areas, and some homeowners who live in a densely populated area of Southwest Washington will suffer the loss of half their backyards.
BPA's engineers say this is a non-issue. A minimal amount, measured in square feet, would have to be accessed along the existing right-of-way, according to BPA. Either of the easterly routes would mean a 70-mile clear-cut swath, 150 feet wide, running all the way to Castle Rock. On the issue of the loss of backyards, well, right now, neighbors use the existing right-of-way for pasture, agriculture, and most cases in neighborhoods as an extension of their backyards. This neighbor's actually built a fence around half of the tower in his backyard and has done some pretty nice landscaping around it.
BPA has never constructed towers and lines in populated areas of Washington state, and therefore do not know how far-reaching the negative impact will be on citizens. Why should we be used as laboratory test rats?
BPA has built and maintains towers and lines in populated areas throughout the Pacific Northwest. BPA has monitored lines 9 and 25, the Ross-Lexington line. If there was a legitimate concern, subdivisions would never have been allowed to build right up and abut the existing right-of-way. The county never would have issued permits for the homes to be built in the first place. And again, schools and neighborhoods. There have been no calls from opposing groups to keep kids out of schools or urging neighbors to move out of neighborhoods where the power lines exist. This is simply a not in my backyard issue. People who live along the existing right-of-way don't want the line constructed because it would mean the BPA would have to cut trees that block their view of the existing power lines. What can we expect as a result of this? More misinformation and more distortion. In fact, it's already started. A letter-writing campaign is underway. In the Battleground Reflector, I'll profile 3 letters. Pay attention to the points the writers make. Maggie Hendricks, who lives along the existing power lines, writes, quote, EMF transmissions impact pregnant women and young children. Property values have declined over 20% due to the recession and will decline another 30% or more with the building of these lines in highly populated areas. Bill Nelson lives at the Highlands at Pleasant Valley neighborhood, which was built in the early 1990s. He bought his home. It's right along the existing right-of-way. He writes, quote, we can't afford to risk losing all of our electrical power in the event of a terrorist attack or natural disaster on a single transmission line. And this should hopefully get your attention. Another member of the Highlands at Pleasant Valley neighborhood has a specific choice for the BPA and for the people who live along the easterly routes. Mary Kay Moscow and Randall Pearl write, quote, selection of the O route through the industrial timberlands to the east makes the most sense from a private property impact perspective. We've all been exposed to an awful lot of information about this project, from our group, from other groups, and from the BPA. Words are very powerful. They can sway public opinion either way. One example is an email sent out recently. In fact, you may have seen it. The writer makes it personal and asks you to vote on the following statements. A. Do you agree with Cheryl, encouraging BPA to widen their existing easement and put these dangerous, huge lines in the backyards of thousands of people? Or B. Or do you side with Erna and those who have been working so hard to move the lines further east, possibly even east of Yale, into DNR land, keeping them away from populated areas, both urban and rural? Our group could have done the same thing, asking the same question, only in these ways. A. Do you agree with Cheryl, advocating for ratepayers, citizens, property owners, and the environment by encouraging BPA to do the right thing and use the less expensive right-of-way where lines have existed for 70 years? Or B. Do you side with Erna, who wants to build lines that will destroy critical wildlife habitat and impact hundreds of families and their businesses who are currently not impacted by high-voltage power lines and towers? We will not initiate personal attacks. A Better Way pledges to deal in the world of fact. Other groups, as you've just seen, would rather deal with fear, playing on the emotions, rather than appealing to people's common sense. We urge the BPA to stay the course and use its existing right-of-way for what it was designed for in the first place, a safe, secure corridor to carry electricity to ratepayers. Now, to that end, we also challenge the BPA to shed its 1940s way of thinking and use 21st century proven engineering when it builds along the existing right-of-way. These lines can be buried where necessary. If a small utility company can do it in Eastern Oregon, surely a monolithic agency like the BPA can do the very same thing.